What do you put it down here?
Welcome everybody.
Testing, testing, 1 2 1 2. Loud enough? Loud enough? Loud enough?
Yeah. Welcome to our Speakers Corner. Saturday in Brisbane. It's a beautiful morning. We do not have any opposition this morning, which is really good. So hopefully we'll be able to speak and be heard without men trying to drown us out and shut us out. We've got some police over here. I still can't believe we need that many police to be able to speak in public about our rights. We're joined by Drew Hutton, who is the co-founder of the Australian Queensland Greens. He's here to speak. He'll be speaking after the women, of course. We're live. Is everybody okay to be live?
Oh, look, it's never been right. But it's there. It's annoying.
Ready to speak some truth. So we've been told by councilman that we're not allowed to have any of our banners up here. The men who dress as women are allowed to put their trans flags up here month after month after month, but we're not allowed to put our women's banners up. You trying to go live? Go live, down the bottom.
Yeah, I've done that. Just keep doing that. Hold on, what I'll do.
Yes.
Where's the microphone?
Marissa had it in her hand.
Okay. Where's the mic?
On the audio.
Oh yeah.
How's that not
I'm supposed to see. Is it on?
Yes. You can just press it again. And see how it's going now.
Oh yeah.
Press it again. Now it's slow.
Oh, okay, cool. Oh, great.
Yeah. So it doesn't pick up something he doesn't. Yeah.
ready to go?
Yeah. Would someone be able to hold this one? Just turn it around. And the cam's at the top, so just hold it there.
We ready?
Hello everybody! Welcome to our Speakers Corner. Thank you everybody for coming, especially in the rain. Thank you to the 10 or so policemen that we've got as well. It's 2025 everybody, and we need a police presence to be able to speak outside about our rights. We need a police presence to not be assaulted by men. And a quick shout out to Drew Hutton as well, who is here to support us, co-founder of the Queensland Greens, and very happy to have you speaking. And thank you to everybody, all the men and the women that are going to come and speak today. And everybody walking past as well, please stop and listen to what we're saying. We are not unreasonable people. We want our sex-based rights back, and we want our children to be safe in Australia. That's all we're asking for. That's why we're standing out here speaking. So please listen to us. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living through a tragedy, a medical scandal that has already shattered countless young lives in Australia. Gender affirming treatments, quote, that's hormone blockers, hormones, puberty blockers and mutilating surgeries are not care. They are a devastating assault on our children. The scars are permanent, the damage is irreversible, and we, the women, are rising up to speak out to end this disaster before it destroys more futures. These are people's kids. For years I've spoken out because I saw where this was heading for women. It was glaringly obvious to me that allowing men to identify as women, granting them access to our sports, our services, and our single-sex spaces would unleash chaos, and I could see how this would harm women the most. A sizable proportion of men, the kind you would instinctively avoid, have invaded our spaces. There are essentially no female-only spaces left in Australia now that men can identify as women. Not too long ago, we avoided these men at all costs. It's a natural biological reaction to men who cross our boundaries. When a man wears women's clothes and claims to be a woman, it triggers an instinctive alarm within me, a visceral warning that I cannot ignore or override. The men who want access to women's spaces are predatory by definition. And as women, we feel a reaction for a reason. It's called survival. To dismiss our instincts and to force us to accept men in ours and our children's safe spaces is to deny that we are fully human. We are adult human females. Knowing this crazy ideology was actually being taken seriously by people in power, knowing that people were trying to convince everyone that men could somehow become women, apart from thinking that this was absolutely insane, I worried for my own and other women's safety. But when I became a mother to my daughter, my fear and aspiration turned to rage. The thought of her growing up with fewer rights than I had, less safety than I had, is utterly unacceptable. I will not stand for it, and neither should you. We are the women who have been speaking out about the absurdity of gender ideology for years. We've been silenced, blocked and ignored by politicians, demonised as TERFs, branded as Nazis, called bigots and homophobes. Men verbally and physically attack us in public. We've been threatened by deluded men. We've been threatened by our own government. Men try to intimidate us for speaking. Friends and family have outcast us, all for daring to defend our human rights and the rights of our children. We are the women they vilify, yet we will be the ones picking up the pieces when this nightmare ends. Because no matter how we are smeared, we are simply the women who cannot stand by while our children are abused in the name of progress. The evidence of this abuse is undeniable. In South Australia recently, the Women's and Children's Hospital confessed to a horrific betrayal. Children as young as 11 years old were approved for gender treatments, in quotes, without the mandatory psychiatric assessments required by state guidelines. These vulnerable kids dealing with confusion and distress were rushed onto paths of destruction, of the destruction of their bodies and minds, drugs and procedures that altered their bodies forever. This wasn't an oversight, this was negligence that stole their health and futures. We must speak about this. We must. The Queensland Government say it's stopping hormone therapy, including puberty blockers, for new patients under 18 in public clinics after discovering treatments at a Cairns facility likely violated national standards. But still, hundreds of children remain on waiting lists to have their puberty stopped. And for those already subjected to these drugs, the harm is already done. Puberty blockers weaken bones, stunt brain development and rob the fertility of kids. These effects are falsely sold as reversible. How is stopping a child's puberty reversible? Pumping kids with hormones and drugs has locked kids into permanent changes that they're too young to comprehend. This isn't medicine, it's a medical scandal that's broken countless lives. We know 15-year-old girls in Australia have undergone double mastectomies. Healthy young girls mutilated for an ideology that denies their biology. In Brisbane, plastic surgeons have admitted that they're willing to perform these surgeries on girls as young as 13. They're willing to cut the breasts off of 13-year-old girls. I'm going to say that again. Plastic surgeons in Brisbane have admitted that they are willing to cut the healthy breasts off of 13-year-old girls. It's happening. These kids are losing their futures to a system that's completely abandoned all reason. Their physical and emotional scars will stay with them for life, a permanent reminder of the adults who have failed them. The federal government's review of gender-affirming care, in quotes, standards is a feeble gesture, far too late for the children already harmed. It won't undo the bones weakened and the bodies already altered, the lives that have been shattered. These treatments defy science, they ignore biology and betray the very kids that we're meant to protect. We women see the truth, and most of us have paid a heavy price for saying it, but we will not stop. We demand an immediate ban on these treatments for minors and anyone. No more hormones, no more puberty blockers, no more surgeries. My daughter, all of our daughters, deserve a world where their bodies and rights are protected. We will fight until this harm ends, until our kids are safe. We will fight until our voices are heard. Thank you. I remembered.
Okay, who we got to speak? Women first today. You want to come up here?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you everybody for coming. And sorry in advance for the length of this, I did try to shorten it. At one of these meetings, okay, yeah, thanks. Oh, yeah, that's good. At one of these meetings earlier in the year, a woman, like the people passing by, stopped to listen When the issue of biological men competing in women's sport was raised, she asked quite seriously, can't trans participate fairly in women's sport? The answer, quite simply, is no. However, there is nothing simple about the issue because today, in 2025, the majority of sporting bodies in Australia allow biological males to participate in the women's and girls' categories. These sporting bodies have bowed to the noisy trans activists, like the crowd we usually have heckling us here, demanding it as their human right to play in the female category. They will call me unsympathetic, insensitive, unempathetic, bigoted, and wanting to deny their rights. Yet I am none of those things. I believe in the rights of all people to participate in and benefit from physical activity and sport. Having been a physical education teacher for 30 years and a past Australian champion, I am more passionate than ever that these benefits must be available to everyone.
Yeah.
But unless sport is kept safe and fair, it benefits no one. I'll briefly outline the reasons why we need to keep sport fair and safe for females. The first issue relates to the benefits afforded to females by participating in sport. We all know the accepted science and research that demonstrates significant physical, mental, social and economic benefits of participating in sport. These benefits are even greater for girls and women who experience many forms of discrimination and violence in their lives, and sport has also become a route out of poverty for many young women. These gains are well recognised and widely accepted, yet when women are forced to participate unfairly against biological males, most of these benefits are denied her. Even worse, when her place is taken by a biological male, girls get the message that their participation and worth is not as important or valuable as a man's. The second main issue relates to the history of women's fights to be included. For centuries, society not only failed to provide girls and women enough opportunities, but outright banned them. Women were excluded from sport until relatively recent times and were not allowed to compete in all sports on the Olympic program until just 13 years ago in London 2012. History demonstrates the historical injustice, and in Australia today there are still 18% fewer females participating than males. If we continue to ignore the science which definitively shows the biological differences between men and women, boys and girls, then we are continuing the unjust treatment of females. It's impossible to make amends for the injustice, lost dreams and memories of past generations. But we can't let another generation of girls down today. Sport really matters to girls and women. Competing fairly and safely matters to girls and women, and they deserve to be able to. It is imperative to protect a category for natal girls and women in all sport if it is to be fair. The trans that are usually here making lots of noise would tell you that biological men in women's sport can be fair by suppressing testosterone. And this is my third point. They are wrong. The science is there to prove it. Testosterone begins to impact male physical and mental development even in the womb and continues through childhood. So even before puberty, boys have a physical advantage. That's why separate categories for boys and girls sport was developed. Of course, after puberty, the physical difference of boys and girls, men and women are huge. Yes, the strength advantage can minimally be decreased, but cannot be fully reversed. Science has proven men have higher haemoglobin levels. Men have larger hearts and lungs. Men have larger skeleton and longer bones. Men have a greater amount of fast twitch muscle fibre, making them 10% faster. Men are 20% better at jumping events. Men have hugely greater muscle mass and strength. Boys and men have broader shoulders and larger hands and feet, and so the list goes on. In other words, men are faster, stronger, and jump higher and further. Biological men competing against women can never be fair. It is not fair that women and girls miss out on places in a team, miss out on winning medals and prizes, miss out on scholarships, miss out on life opportunities while biological men take their places. The United Nations General Assembly report on women and girls in sport states that in 2024 alone, over 600 female athletes in more than 400 competitions have lost more than 890 medals. It's not fair that women's category of sport is no longer protects the inclusion, safety and dignity of women and girls. The trans activists would be yelling at this stage to say, but those differences between men and women can be decreased by hormone treatment and suppressing testosterone.
Bullshit.
However, the latest science proves otherwise. Studies now show that testosterone suppression shows very trivial changes in muscle mass and strength of about 5% after 12 months of treatment. Therefore, male strength advantages are only minimally reduced when testosterone is suppressed. Treatment does not alter other physiological advances such as size, height, limb length, hand and feet size, or heart and lung capacity. These advantages can never be reversed. Including biological men into female categories discriminates against girls and women. Which brings me to the final point, one of safety. Apart from being unfair, the biological differences between men and women dramatically add to the risk of participating, making sport unsafe for women. Collisions, tackles and other contact between boys and girls, men and women are inherently more dangerous for females, and fear of injury can and does lead to self-exclusion. For safety, girls and women expect and must have available single-sex change rooms. Women and girls do not feel safe and feel intimidated by being forced to share their once safe space with biological men. Removing single-sex spaces in sport increases the risk of sexual harassment, assault and voyeurism in the change rooms. Female athletes and coaches who object to the inclusion of men in their spaces or sport due to concerns about safety, privacy and fairness are silenced or forced to self-censor. Otherwise, they risk losing sporting opportunities. Many are also accused of bigotry, suspended from teams and subjected to restraining orders, expulsion, defamation and unfair disciplinary proceedings. This form of coercion is not acceptable. The scientific research on biological differences and the United Nations all recommend the exclusion of biological males from the female category to ensure fairness and safety, and the inclusion of an open category to ensure the ability of all to participate. So to conclude,
They don't want an open
it is
category.
not acceptable to erase female achievements and records. Rewards, fame and sporting careers are just as important to females as for men. Eradicating an authentic female category is to the detriment of society. We must not allow gender ideology to raise transgender athletes as a new and protected class over women and girls. females deserve and demand safe and fair sport, and we will not be silent.
Yes.
Who wants to go next? I just want to say how nice it is. We have been able to speak freely for the last 12 months. Woo. This is the first time in a very long time we haven't had the trans activists standing here and trying to drown us out, trying to intimidate us, trying to harass us. So it's just really nice. So we can actually speak and people can hear us.
Yes. Oh.
Okay. Thank you to those women who've organised this and all the other events that have preceded this. The first shock for me with this incredible moment we're in was when I learnt that rapists were being put in women's jails. What fresh hell is this, I thought. And it was just 5 minutes ago that we had the Me Too, hashtag Me Too, which, as you remember, was focused initially very much on relatively well-off women in Hollywood being exploited. But now we had very often disadvantaged, impoverished, often women who had been sexually assaulted, very often being put in, being held in jails in which they put males who were rapists. The absolute cruelty of this just blew me away. And I thought, how did this ideological straitjacket descend on people who regard themselves as progressive? The second shock came when I discovered that a male who was approaching 40 years of age entered the female weightlifting competition in the Pacific Games. This male called Laurel Hubbard competed against 18-year-old Samoan women, half his age. He came from a very wealthy white New Zealand family, and somehow this was acceptable. It was completely unacceptable, and very often the male athletes who are entering the female competition are older. They are, at that point in their sporting life when they, vacate left field because they can't compete at the highest level in the male category. The next shock came when I learnt that young people, children and youth who most likely would grow up to be gay or lesbian were being caught up in the gender conveyor belt. These are young people. We have always known that children who most likely grow up to be gay or lesbian are gender non-conforming. Boys who like, things that are regarded as girly. Girls who like playing sport and being a tomboy and having short hair. These children were once they're on this conveyor belt, and people who are normally rational people look at these kids and go, oh, you like dressing up, you like girly things, must be in the wrong body. Let's change your body. How regressive is that? It's unbelievable. So these children are on this gender conveyor belt to the gender industry, which is now quite an industry now. There are a lot of people making money out of this. Now we see that young gay and lesbian adults are disproportionately represented amongst detransitioners with regret for the permanent changes to their bodies. And let's not forget that when children are put on puberty blockers, and that's followed by cross-sex hormones, they will be sterile. And very often they will have impaired or no sexual function, as well as all the other serious consequences of these extreme experimental, I don't even want to call them treatments because they're experimental interventions. The next shock for me came when I learnt that, and I am a lesbian, I learnt that we have been redefined by the rainbow orgs that once should, were meant to be protecting our rights and had done for many years. But now gay and lesbian people have been redefined. We were no longer allowed to say we were same-sex attracted, we were same-gender attracted.
Yeah.
Homosexual was no longer a thing, even because it's got the word sex in the middle of it, so you can see why they dropped that word. And then I learnt that it was illegal for lesbians to have an advertised public event in this country. Illegal for lesbians to hold a public event in this country unless they include males who identify as lesbians. So the fundamental right of lesbians to self-organise, to have meaningful language, has been lost because of the ideological straitjacket that has been pushed by the queer ideologues in this country. It's a new religion. Some people call it genderism, but it is very evangelistic, and they are pushing it on everyone and driving it through our institutions. I've lost my spot in my phone. So the right to self-organise and to have meaningful language is an essential right for everyone. It is essential for women to have the right to self-organise without the presence of men. It is essential for lesbians to be able to self-organise without the presence of men. We all understand that it is good that transgender people can self-organise, and they do. They have events for transgender people only. Nobody objects to that. My next shock was to discover the indifference of people who regard themselves as progressive to these shocking things that were happening. And, you know, as many of us have thought about this indifference and this lack of interest in what's happening to children who are most likely to grow up gay or lesbian or autistic or just girls, unhappy girl children who are being harmed by this current medical scandal. But I think it's not necessarily indifference. I think most people have doubts about this. I think most people have their feet on the ground. We know that biological sex exists. We know that it's important. And so I think there are large numbers of people who have doubts and they are just not voicing them. And part of it is the ideological enforcement through bullying, through all of the terrible tactics that have been used by the trans activist lobby, which has been evident here over the years, which is why there is a police presence here, because the tactics of these activists are so offensive and so bullying. So I want to thank the brave women who have organised this event over the last years, and the brave women who have organised the events in other parts of Australia. You are absolutely brilliant, and I think there is a trajectory for this. We saw it in the United States election. I don't think queer theory cannot survive contact with the general public. Once the general public know how bizarre this is and how offensive so many elements of it are, the public will not buy it. So in the US election, we saw that, from my point of view, as a lifelong lefty, we saw that the Democrats just walked into a complete trap with this stuff. And a significant number of people who would normally swing to the Democrats swung towards Trump because of the insane positions that the Democrats had adopted on some of these issues. So thank you everybody who has organised this, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Shay. I wasn't planning on speaking today, but after Deb was talking about women in sport, I have my own personal experience to share with you. So as you can see, I'm about 53 kilos on a good day. I'm pretty tiny. It's had been a sort of bucket list item for me for many years to play AFL football. But due to my size, I was always a bit frightened because it's a pretty physical sport. And, you know, I sort of thought, well, I'm getting up in age. I'm now 51. But at the encouragement of a few friends last year, I took the plunge and decided to play. Well, I had the greatest time playing the season last year, up until we sort of played one team. Shall I name them, the team?
Yeah.
Yeah, why not? Jindalee AFL Football Club, and to my surprise, after the game, we traditionally get in a huddle, us girls, and we go, you know, my team, their team, my team. Under my right arm, I'm like, say what now? I was trying not to stare, but I'm like, shit, that looks like a 5 o'clock shadow. Sure enough, yeah, a man. So, fortunately, he obviously played in the forward line and I played in the forward line, so we didn't meet on the field. However, at my age, 51, at my size of 53 kilos wringing wet, can I afford to meet a man on the field? No. So guess who's not playing AFL football anymore? This girl. So how is that fair? If we had some of our usual friends that are usually here going against us, they'd be like, oh, but what about his rights? What about his rights playing? Well, hang on. Women have been sacrificing for a million years. So if you're that desperate to be a woman, well, you might have to sacrifice playing sport then, mate, mightn't you?
Yeah.
I need that.
Well done, Shay.
Who's next? Yes.
Women should not require a police presence to gather and speak in public. 2025. We speak the truth and we refuse to abide by the new gender woo orthodoxy. Men are not women ever. No woman has a penis. Regardless of any special self-declared identity, women and girls need single-sex spaces free from all males. And women must have the right to state these facts and to say no to men in our spaces and sports without fear of retribution, violence or penalty. However, we know that's not what's happening. Free speech in this country is well and truly under attack. To quote the late great Magdalene Burns, it's not hate to speak the truth. It's not hate to defend your rights. The Greens, as well as the Labor Party, have framed our concerns as hate speech, specifically trans exclusionary hate speech. Women advocating for women-only spaces, services and sports free from all males is considered hate speech. Greens members like Linda Gale, Nina Valens, Drew Hutton here have all felt the full force of the Greens' authoritarian machine. According to the Greens, transgender women are women, transgender men are men, non-binary gender identities exist and are valid. It is as simple as that, they say. But it's most definitely not as simple as that. This is state-sanctioned human rights abuse on a societal level. Now that gender identity, something that is most certainly changeable, has been written into Australian law, such as the amendment to the Federal Discrimination Act back in 2013, we now have a collision of rights. Women have lost our existing rights to all female-only provisions in sports because gender identity has been inserted into our laws. But it is in direct conflict with women's sex-based rights as well as homosexual rights. And we know women are losing their livelihoods for daring to speak out. We're being coerced and into silence and compliance with legislation now in place across most of Australia, which permits any man to falsify his birth certificate to say female. If any man can be a female, the category loses all meaning and ceases to exist. So do all female-only single-sex spaces. This also skews our crime statistics, as a perpetrator's gender identity can be recorded in lieu of biological sex. So how can our governments possibly hope to tackle the national shameful epidemic of male violence against women if we don't keep accurate data on things like this? And it has a flow-on effect into prisons, medical settings. Elderly women and disabled non-verbal women are being denied the right to request female-only intimate care. Women and girls are being gaslit and indoctrinated into an ideology that erases the reality of our sexed bodies. I, for one, don't believe in gender identity. In the same way, many here don't subscribe to any religious belief. And we must have the right to reject this ideology and all the tenets promoted as part of it, such as preferred pronouns. And we as taxpayers must not be forced to foot the bill of these extreme body modifications, be it porn-saturated men wanting boob jobs, or vulnerable, confused, generally mentally unwell teenage girls having perfectly healthy breasts chopped off to affirm their gender. But that's exactly what Labor and the Greens have proposed under Medicare and will implement if they win another term in office at the federal election next month. For stating these facts, women like me are verbally abused, threatened, physically assaulted. In one instance, I was called I won't say the word, starts with C, ends in T, for voicing my concerns about gender ideology by a man, no less, at a women's rights rally, of course, here in the city in 2023. A man named Jade Whitler, a man who wants to be known as she, who claims a female identity, a man who the Queensland Greens went on to run as a candidate in the recent state elections. But we know that it's not just women, homosexuals who are harmed by transgenderism and queer ideology. It's an entire generation of vulnerable youth who are being lied to and confused. And as a mother, this is my primary motivation for standing here and speaking. Thankfully, things are starting to change, and I'm going to just summarise and cut off my speech because I know it's been going on and I really want to hear Drew Hutton speak. But we just need to take account of what's happening with youth. No child is trans. All children are perfect. They don't require medicalisation, and they certainly don't require experimental surgeries to live authentic lives. Sex is very real. It's based in science and biology, and it's immutable. Gender identity, meantime, has no basis in science, only ideology. So to any young people listening who might be confused about their identity, I was a tomboy like many women here. I experienced bullying in primary school. I felt uncomfortable, anxious, depressed, confused, going through puberty, and had trouble navigating adolescence. It's a very, very common part of growing up. Many of the gay and lesbians here have also experienced homophobia and discrimination. Gender-confused kids should be encouraged and supported to accept their biological reality and be given psychological and psychiatric treatment within the watchful waiting framework, which historically sees 90% of gender-confused youth realigning with the biological sex if allowed to go through natural puberty. And for girls, it's nearly 100%. I commend Queensland Health Minister Tim Nicholls for launching the review of the evidence for puberty blockers and suspending their use in Queensland. Let's hope that it is an independent investigation as it's being touted, because children's lives do depend on it. We don't want to see one more child sterilised with these dangerous drugs or their bodies irreversibly damaged. Thankfully, we may have turned a corner this week with a family court judge harshly criticising the approach of hospitals to children questioning their gender, saying the decision to affirm unreservedly any child that raises concerns over their gender is oddly binary. The judgment takes aim at the Australian Standards of Care, which, remember, is written by OzPath, a lobby group with no medical specialties.
Yeah.
But Justice Andrew Strum said they do not have the approval or endorsement of the Commonwealth or any state or territory government. He also said ideology has no place in the application by courts of the law. So thank you to Justice Strum, and hopefully this is the beginning of the end. We have to get activist medical practitioners and lobby groups such as OzPath away from these vulnerable children. It is for the sake of these kids that we refuse to stay silent. Leave the kids alone.
Yay. Brilliant.
We weren't sure whether or not the trans activists would turn up today because it's only 3 weeks until the election, and they know that they are a bad look for the Greens and Labor. So it's really refreshing to be able to speak here today and not be shouted down and abused.
Woo!
So I wrote this anticipating they may be here, but in the back of my mind I thought, no, they won't turn up because it's close to an election. Anyway, I'll read as I wrote it, believing if they turned up. We believe in free speech. Living in a democracy, or what used to be one, we have always respected that principle. We've never attended trans rallies to disrupt them, nor have we tried to silence, drown out, or assault anyone expressing their views in public. We believe the trans community has every right to voice their concerns and speak freely on issues that affect them. Unfortunately, that same freedom has never been extended to us until today. Time and time again, we've been denied the right to speak openly without interruption or hostility by those who claim to stand for inclusion and tolerance. When women, or anyone, are silenced through harassment, threats or violence, it's not just an attack on them personally, it's an attack on freedom of speech itself and by extension on democracy. Why do the trans activists continue with this sustained campaign to stop us speaking? We know why, because they are afraid that opposing voices will weaken their influence, challenge their beliefs. Silencing dissent helps them maintain control over how issues are talked about and who gets to be seen as good or right. It isn't only the trans activists that are guilty of this. Our governments are just as guilty. We may not have politicians standing in the mob at our events, but they're doing something just as chilling. Introducing hate speech laws designed to shut us up. When you're told you can't speak about something that affects your body, your safety, your dignity, when your entire sex class is told to stay quiet for someone else's comfort, that is not protection. That's oppression wrapped in the language of tolerance. Women's voices have been completely ignored in the discussions that directly affected our rights and our safety. This has created a deep sense of disillusionment and distrust in the institutions that are supposed to protect us. This isn't just a personal loss, it undermines the legitimacy of democratic systems. Women are feeling as if our voices don't matter, that our experiences aren't valid, and that the institutions meant to serve us instead are serving the interests of others. Women-only spaces like bathrooms, changing rooms, shelters and prisons have been designed to protect women's physical and emotional safety, especially in vulnerable situations. When these spaces are handed over to another sex class, men, it risks undermining those protections. Women, particularly those who have experienced trauma like sexual assault, are placed in situations where they might feel unsafe or re-traumatised. This leads to a broader erosion of trust in spaces where women need to feel most secure. Handing over safeguarding to the male sex class, especially without meaningful discussion, sends a powerful message that women's boundaries don't matter as much as men's desires or convenience. It normalises the idea that women's privacy, dignity and autonomy are secondary to the demands of others. Dismissing women's concerns as transphobic or hateful only creates further division. Women, especially those who feel our safety and rights are being trampled on, may withdraw from public discourse. I can't help but feel this is exactly what this is about, to destroy women's voices from every aspect of society. One of the biggest dangers is that policies and law that ignore unique vulnerability of women risk enabling predatory behaviours. Predatory men can exploit policies that allow them to claim access to women's spaces using the gender loophole to gain entry. Women fought long and hard for the right to safeguard their spaces, from workplaces to shelters to sports. These protections have been casually dismissed in the name of inclusion without considering the real risks. This has led to a setback of the progress made in the fight for women's equality. The focus has shifted from securing and advancing women's rights towards the prioritisation of one particular group's identity without any consideration of the impact of women's safety and dignity. Freedom of speech, the very right to voice our concerns, as we are doing here today, is steadily being stripped away. It's not just disappearing on paper, but in practice, by allowing men and their handmaidens to harass, intimidate and assault us without consequence. Take Billboard Chris, who was arrested and fined for simply standing alone in the Queen Street Mall with a sign that read, "Children can't consent to puberty blockers." Meanwhile, over the past 12 months, we've watched the same group of thugs and their supporters openly break local and state laws without facing a single repercussion. That is not justice. This is a blatant case of two-tiered policing, where one group is free to speak and act with impunity, while the other is silenced because their message doesn't align with the government's ideological narrative, one that has destroyed women's rights and children's safeguarding. Our freedom of speech is not just under threat, it is being actively dismantled. When freedom of speech dies, truth goes with it, and so does justice. Anyone else want to speak?
Well done.
Drew? Yeah, Drew? Drew's going to speak now. We've all been waiting for Drew to speak.
The headliner.
Hello everyone, I'm really honoured to be here today and thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to, I think you should all give yourselves a bit of a clap actually. This is a victory. They didn't turn up. And you know why they didn't turn up? Because they knew what a bad look it is. They know that we are speaking the truth and they are just a bunch of thugs and cowards and bullies.
Yeah.
And when our leaders fail us, ordinary people are got to step up and become heroes. And that's what you are. You've become heroes in a really important campaign, a really important moment in history. Now, I might be wrong. They might have decided not to turn up because they've got better things to do. They might have gone to find some Jewish shopkeepers' windows to smash, or maybe there's some women's rights books that they've got to burn, or maybe there's a few democracy activists they've got to beat up. Maybe they're just invading Poland. Who knows? Anyway, the one thing that they do not stand for is free speech. And free speech is what we are claiming here today. You've claimed it, you've won, they lost. Now, I don't know if you know who I am, but I'm an old, very old activist. I've been an environmental and social justice activist in this state for the last 50 years. I'm the founder of the Queensland Greens, and I was a co-founder with people like Bob Brown of the Australian Greens. And Libby and I, my wife and I, were having a lovely retirement there a little while back, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now. And all of a sudden, I saw that the convener of the Victorian Greens had been sacked. And she was sacked because she'd written in an article 3 years earlier that the Greens, my political party, the Greens, should be aware of problems that result from having women's only spaces like change rooms and toilets and prisons and refuges and women's sport invaded by biological men. And I thought, well, that's not an unreasonable thing to say, but she got sacked for it. So I went on Facebook and I said, I thought that was a wrong move by the Greens. They shouldn't do it. I didn't disagree with Greens policy on transgender or anything. I just said, in terms of free speech, this goes right against what the Greens should be about. A number of people came onto my site and made comments. And they usually made comments, a lot of them were making comments along the lines of, we should have sex-based rights, not gender identification as the key means of identifying people. And they were also talking about women's only spaces. The Greens then told me that while there was nothing that they could object to in my posts, that I had to delete every one of those comments. Every one had to be deleted. And I said, but I believe in free speech. These are legitimate points that these people are making. They're not being defamatory. They're not being abusive. Why should I delete them? And I refused. So they said, well, you're suspended. You're suspended until you delete those comments. Well, that was nearly 3 years ago. In a totally corrupt process, totally corrupt, and I won't go into just the details of it, it's too boring, but they decided that they were going to get rid of me. They were going to cashier me from the Greens. And their motivation, I believe, was if we can do it to Drew Hutton, we can do it to anybody. So keep your head down, the rest of you who think there's such a thing as sex-based rights and not gender identity, because if you put your head up, the same thing's going to happen to you. This is not free speech. And that is a key part, a key plank in why we set the Greens up in the first place. There are 4 pillars of Greens policy, and originally non-violence was one, and I don't believe these people believe in that for a moment, and their behaviour at some of these meetings illustrate that. And they don't believe in democracy, because freedom of speech is an integral part of democratic values. So, I went through the internal process. They still maintained that they were going to suspend me. And finally, it just dawned on me, I'm a bit old and a bit slow. So it took me until about February of this year to realise, hey, these people aren't going to give me my membership back. They're never going to give it back. There's only one thing I can do, and that is to actually take the issue into the public arena. That's what I'm doing here today. Now, I've been accused of being a free speech absolutist. I'm not. I think there are limits on free speech. You shouldn't be able to yell fire in a crowded theatre. You shouldn't be able to use, terrible hate speech, especially in situations that can cause enormous harm to people. There have to be limits on free speech. There are limits to all rights. All rights have limits. And those limits are established in a democratic society by people coming together and working out civilly and rationally what those limits should be. Where do you draw the line? Where does one person's individual liberty become another person's nightmare? That has to be done in a process which respects the right of all people to engage in civil and rational discussion and debate. But if it applies to free speech, it applies just as much to transgender rights. They've got limits too. But they don't think they have. They don't think there's any process that they've got to go through to establish where you draw the line on rights. They think that if you just identify as a man, that automatically, if you're a biological male and identify as a woman, that gives you all the rights that women should have. And that's simply wrong. And it has, not only is it wrong in fact, it's wrong in process. The process that should have gone through to establish that was a democratic process where people talk civilly and rationally to each other. They discuss it, they debate it, they work out where the lines are drawn, and they come to a common sense and reasonable outcome at the end that all people can live with, that causes a maximum amount of freedom to everybody and a minimum amount of harm to everybody. That's what democracy, one of the key things that democracy is all about. But today's not about me. Today's about women. Today's about the rights that women have and should have. It's also about safety. I think there are two key issues that are going to become absolutely important. They are important now, and they're going to continue to be important until they're properly resolved. This is one of them. This is this stupid debate, and by the way, I think that some of the people who are taking up this debate on the transgender issue, including the Greens, have become a cult. Nothing else, just a cult. And the problem about cults is that they are totally inward looking, they lose contact with reality, they lose contact with the rest of the community, and ultimately they become irrelevant. And that's what my party's going to become if it keeps going on this course.
It already is.
Already is. So, it is not transphobic for me to say, or for Libby to say, my 9-year-old granddaughter should not be having to get changed in a change room at a swimming pool next to a person with a penis. What is reasonable about that? It is not hate speech. It is not bigoted to say a girl or a woman should not have to compete in a sporting team against a biological male. There is nothing bigoted about that. There is nothing cruel about saying that children who are having problems with identity, and problems with who they are and what they're going to be in life, there is nothing cruel about saying you should actually get proper support. Rather than medical interventions, get some proper support to work out just where you're going in life. These are reasonable and common sense and humane assertions that people are making. And it's organisations like the Greens who are simply ignoring that and going off in their own authoritarian directions. Now, I believe in transgender rights. I believe that people who are transgender, who make that decision for themselves, fine. You deserve all the rights that you can get, but you don't deserve the right to impose your desire for unlimited liberty on other people who are going to get hurt by it. Now, Judith Wright, the great Queensland poet and environmentalist, once said, no big struggle, no important struggle is ever finally won. Sooner or later, you're going to have to fight it all again. And she was talking about the Great Barrier Reef, and she led the campaign to protect the Great Barrier Reef. And of course, we've got it again today. We've got to defend it against climate change. But it's, the same thing is true of just about every major step forward in human freedom and human dignity in our lifetimes. You've simply got to fight the same battles over again sometimes. And that's the case here. Male domination, patriarchy, the male violence, all of those things are being resurrected. And it's no small issue. Young men, boys, are being exposed to the sort of pornography, the sort of experiences that they should never be exposed to as children. Never. It is creating the worst possible images of women and females that it could possibly have, and it leads, one of the factors that leads to violence against women, sometimes by the boys themselves. I mean, there's been plenty of cases. The show Adolescence on television is one such example. So I'm afraid this battle is just going to have to keep being fought. And I'm very proud to stand with you in doing that. And I recognise you for your bravery in coming out and making a stand on this. In a little while after my speech, if there's nobody else going to talk, I'm going to put this somewhere here. I've got a billboard. And it says, support free speech, freedom of speech. Now, talking about fighting battles over again, 42 years ago, I chained myself to a tree, just 100 metres down the road here, to a leopard tree. It was part of the free speech and civil liberties campaigns that we were running back in the early 80s. We had a government here in Queensland under Joe Bajelki-Peterson which banned all public assembly, banned free speech, banned anything that was opposed to anything that particular government stood for. And so I chained myself to a tree and I spoke. Actually, about 2,000 people turned up to hear it, and it took the police half an hour to find a pair of bolt cutters to cut me out. And so I had plenty of time to talk about free speech before I got shoved into a paddy wagon and off to the watch house. But I thought I might commemorate that particular incident and that campaign, and emulate the activities of a fellow called Billboard Chris, who came to town a few weeks ago and put a billboard on and walked into the mall. Now, I'm not going to impede anybody. I'm not going to even talk. I'm just going to walk there with this sign on. I'm going to stand there for a few minutes and then I'm going to go. And I'd ask the police not to give me a move on order because I'm not going to hurt anybody. But we have that campaign that we ran, by the way, in the 80s, led to, in 1992, the Peaceful Assembly Act. The Peaceful Assembly Act says you can public speak, you can have a rally, you can assemble, with or without authorisation, with or without. I won't have authorisation to do this, but the Act says I can. And I'm going to illustrate that that's a key plank in our history. We fought for it and we want to keep it. And we're not going to let organisations like the Greens or anybody else, and by the way, the Queensland State Government, which has it in their legislation, saying this sort of rubbish, we're not going to let them take it away from us.
No.
Now, when I was running the Lock the Gate campaign against coal seam gas in Western Queensland in the early days, dozen or so years ago, I met an old farmer, a woman farmer, who said to me, Drew, every now and then, or at some point, you've got to put a spear in the ground. And what she meant by that was, you've got to take a stand. When the time's right, when you feel that it's intolerable, you take a stand. You're brave. You act with courage. Ordinary people have to become heroes. Now that's going to happen with this movement, I'm sure. They're only a small group here today, but people out there know that what we're saying is true. And what they're saying is a bunch of lies. It's authoritarian. It's against the spirit that a democratic society should embody. We're going to put our spear in the ground. And if organisations like the Greens think that that's something that they've got to snuff out, then watch out. They're going to get hit by a freight train. Thank you. By the way, Women Life Freedom. Somebody went on Facebook and told me that you shouldn't have a slogan like Women Life Freedom because that belongs to Trump. What a load of crap. They're three great words, three great concepts. And the freedom one is the one especially that I'm going to be espousing as I walk into the mall. Thank you.
Thanks, Drew, for speaking. You're an absolute legend. It was a pleasure to have you here today. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Thanks very much, Drew Hutton. It was an honour to be here and hear your speech. I had a list. I could have asked ChatGPT to generate it, but it would have been too long. But the list of ironic concepts that the trans movement don't seem to get. And I've noticed where we are, and I know we're fighting against one particular issue, and I could stay on point with that, but at the same time I can't help notice the larger picture, the larger pattern, what feels like an assault on Western civilization in sync around the world. Now this is, if the trans movement was something organic, if it had come up from confused kids and they'd built their own language and their own flags and it had happened sporadically and gradually, it might have found a way to integrate and have its own healthy boundaries. Maybe it wouldn't be forcefully bulldozing women's rights as aggressively as it is. The fact is, it is not an organic movement. It is a top-down, sponsored movement from funds that have incredibly deep pockets. So brands like Rip Curl and Bonds and so many well-meaning, well-known brands have been bought out and are owned by massive hedge funds like BlackRock, Vanguard and State Street, who also happen to have deep investments in the transgender industry. If you can mutilate a child's body, you have a patient for life. The incentives here to push this industry through are massive for those who only appreciate dollars. And unfortunately, we are ruled by people who only appreciate dollars. So when we look at what's happened to the Greens Party, they once upon a time stood for integrity and free speech, as we've just heard from the Queensland founder, Drew Hutton. Money talks, right? I can only guess that the Greens have been infiltrated by money, in the same way that the Labor Party and the Liberal Party don't seem to be terribly interested in defending the rights of ordinary people, particularly women. And it's really difficult to have these discussions if we can't have clear, fixed meanings for words. One of those words being woman. If we dilute that and allow it to include men who feel like women and then don't apply too much scrutiny, where does that leave us? We're lost at sea. All words have no meaning if we go down that path. And that's where we're being pushed. We're being herded like sheep into a totalitarian hell. I really value the police turning up and being here for this, but it's not hard to imagine a scenario where one of their diversity officers has a whisper and starts doing what they did in New Zealand. I'm really concerned about Australian civilization, Western civilization as a whole, because it's easy to take for granted. I took it for granted for a really long time. I took sex-based rights as a given. I used to think that the Greens were about protecting koalas and gay rights. They've completely betrayed gay rights by giving that up. Yeah, if you can't be same-sex attracted anymore, then yeah, gay rights have been completely bulldozed by trans ideology. Yeah, I can think of nothing more homophobic than telling a young effeminate boy, I guess maybe you're trapped in the wrong body. What a horrible thing to say. That's the same thing as telling, it's like calling someone a fag. It's like you're being a bit of a sissy, therefore you're a girl. It's that same logic, but that's the new kindness. Like, what is kindness anymore? Is kindness agreeing with some fetishy man who wants to take pills to grow boobs and all the rest? Is that what kindness is? Is kindness being silent when you see injustice? I don't think so. I'm really concerned about the lack of free speech, the attacks on it. Just this week, Chris Minns, the Premier of New South Wales, the legislation's been passed down there about conversion therapy. And it sounds horrible because they've used the LGBT wagon, the acronym that I never was asked about. I was never checked to see if it was okay if I get grouped with the same nut jobs who want to invert reality. It's like being gay and being trans are completely unrelated. But under the banner of gay rights in New South Wales, they passed conversion therapy laws. So now, if a boy says he's a girl and wants to have a conversation about it, if you don't affirm that child in the delusion that they're the opposite sex, you could be guilty of conversion therapy. So the irony there is that conversion therapy, like trans rights, are all about conversion therapy, and that's been smuggled through under this fog of insanity that's infected every institution around the world. It's driving me absolutely nuts. I had some notes, but I'm probably better freestyling. This landed in my mailbox the other day. It's from my local Greens member, Stephen Bates. I had a conversation with him back in the day when Kelly J. Keane was, they were trying to block her from coming into the country, and I wasn't thrilled about that. So I bailed him up for a chat. I managed to get him to eventually concede that transing the gay away was a genuine concern, because he's gay, but he seems very captured by the LGBT acronym, and maybe it's money, maybe it's the influence of money, maybe it's the same thing that's corrupted the Greens Party and what it used to be about. But I received this in the mailbox, and there's a photo of him at one of the trans rallies. In the background, there's the cliched thought stopper, trans rights are human rights. That sign is there. And the caption for it is, listened to everyday people. I see glaring juxtaposition there and just disgusting hypocrisy. There's so much to unpack in all of that. Like the trans rights are human rights. All human rights stem from the right to free speech. If we don't have free speech, you can forget about all other rights. It becomes a complete joke at that point. Stephen Bates is fine with free speech being crushed in the name of trans ideology. And he thinks that the trans nutjob collective are everyday people. I completely disagree. Yeah, I haven't prepared a proper speech. I'm going to wrap this up, but if we don't all start speaking up, we're going to lose the capacity to do so. All rights stem from free speech. I really hope we can wake up to that before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak? No one else? I guess we'll finish up. Leah? Come on, Leah. She always does such a good job at closing.
I'll just put this.
Thank you everybody for coming. I'll be quick because it's raining, so we really appreciate everyone who's come, and also to the people who've just been listening and stopped by to listen to us as well. We're getting a lot of positive feedback because we're just speaking facts, we're just saying things that are true, like men are not women, shouldn't be in our spaces, we shouldn't be mutilating children for an ideology that makes zero sense. So come back next month, please join us. We are Woman Up Queensland, and you can find us on the socials, and we will see you next time. And let's have a big cheer for women's rights and children's safeguards. Yes. Thank you. Thanks, sis. Bye, everybody.